Hello and welcome to our 7-8 minutes of weekly Torah talk. Our guest today is Rabbi Michael Werbow of Temple Beis Shalom in Sarasota, Florida. Hello, Rabbi. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Our Parsha is Tetze, and in this Parsha we count, if I'm not mistaken, 73 mitzvot, 73 commandments, among which the laws of the beautiful captive, the inheritance rights of the firstborn, the wayward and rebellious son, burial and dignity of the dead, returning a lost object, sending away the mother bird before taking her young. Also recounted are the penalties for adultery, for the rape of seduction, and for a husband who falsely accuses his wife of infidelity. Our Parsha includes laws governing the purity of the military camp, the prohibition against turning in an escaped slave, the duty to pay a worker on time, and to allow anyone working for you to eat on the job. Tetze concludes with the famous and somewhat troubling obligation to remember what Amalek did to you on the road on your way out of Egypt. The first pasuk of the Parsha we read this week says, כי תצא למלחמה על אויביך ונתנו אדוני אלוהיך בידיך ושבית שביו. If you go out to war against your enemies, and the Lord your God will deliver him into your hands, and you take his captives. So, Rabbi, this parsha begins with some rules of war, and it ends with the commandments to remember a war. So it's not a cheery parsha, I'd say.
It's not cheery in that way, in that it starts and ends on that note. But there's many things within the Parsha itself that bring a real positive light to give us ideas of how we're supposed to live our lives. And if we think about the warfare not as taking up arms and metal, but to more of a metaphoric warfare, like what are we supposed to be striving for in terms of bringing holiness into the world and battling against the forces against holiness, then it maybe has a little bit more cheer to it in that way.
So we need to bring holiness even in case of war, even to the worst situation in human life. That's the idea?
Sure, I think that in a direct sense, thinking about the commandments that are listed there, yes, I think that's one of the things that we're trying to do, is to say, well, there's going to be times where there's actual warfare, and therefore we need to approach those moments in as holy a way as possible.
So let's go to the end of the parsha, because really the most famous part of this parsha is the issue of Amalek, the commandment to remember Amalek. Well, it's not just remembering Amalek, we also need to annihilate them in case we find them. So what is it about? Why do we need to remember? What do we need to remember exactly?
Well, I think that what we need to remember is, again, what are the things that are pursuing us? What are the things that are attacking us from behind, that we're unaware of, that we don't take full notice of until it's too late, and then those are the things that we need to try and blot out. We're, I think, way past the idea of actually blotting out a group of people, but rather evil in the world. And those things that again, as I said before, that try to bring down holiness.
So we need to assume that the story of Amalek is not a specific story about a specific people, but rather Amalek is a symbol of something.
Right. Exactly. Amalek is a symbol of powers that are rising up against us, right, and not necessarily not physical. But also, the drive to just constantly be pursuing more and more wealth, or the drive to for beauty, or in a vain type of a way. Those types of things can overwhelm us and overtake us.
I'll ask you a tough question. Is there a side of us, the Jewish people, that can also be referred to as Amalek? Do we also have an Amalek side within ourselves?
It is a difficult question, but I think there's always that potential. Right? I think there's always that potential that we could slip into, if we want to use modern ideas, into the dark side, right? And we have to be cautious of that.
Now, when we think about remembrance, remembrance is something that often happens to us. It is not something that we do. So, but in this case, we have a commandment. So is it a passive commandment or an active one?
Right. I think that we see both of those within that. The beginning of that paragraph is to remember Amalek, and then it ends with lo tishkach, don't forget. And I think that in some ways remembering is the passive. And things pop into our heads and we remember something. But not forgetting is something that you have to work on, and you have to constantly pursue the positive ideals.
And we see in the Torah very little compassion for Amalek. Why don't we have any sort of compassion for them?
Well, I think there's no compassion because Amalek is seen really as pure evil, right? And if there's redeeming values, which we find in most other cases, then I think that there's more compassion for it. But really, to have that sense of pure evil, we want to eradicate that as much as we can.
And this includes, as we know, a commandment to kill all men, women, children, flock, whatever.
Right, and I think that, again, that's something where I very quickly jump to a more metaphoric reading of it, and not be concerned about there ever being that injunction for us to go and eradicate a group of people.
Do you feel, or do you still feel somewhat uncomfortable when you read this passage every year?
I think the discomfort comes up in that knowing how to go about it sometimes, right? In that there is that potential in some ways for us to slip into more of a dark way of approaching it. In some ways, it reflects back towards last week's parsha where we have tzedek tiyadov, right. That if you're pursuing righteousness, one of the understandings, you pursue righteousness, you're supposed to do it in a righteous way. And so here, where we're pursuing to blot out this force of evil, we have to still do it in an appropriate way and not be lured, right, to sort of do it in any means possible.
Rabbi, thank you so much for your wisdom, and Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you for the opportunity.